Hello, Whispers in the Dark viewers. In today's video, I will tell you our Whispers of the Cursed Doll story. You may feel scared while listening to this story. If you are ready for horror and mystery, let's start. The old Victorian house loomed before them, its weathered facade casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. Sarah gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white as she stared up at the imposing structure. This was their new home, a fresh start for her and the children after so much upheaval. "Are we there yet, Mommy?" Lily's voice piped up from the back seat, her small face pressed against the car window. Sarah turned to her daughter and forced a smile. "Yes, sweetie, this is it." She glanced at Ethan, who sat silently, his eyes fixed on the house. "What do you think, Ethan?" Ethan shrugged, his brow furrowed. "It's big." He paused, then added, "and old." Sarah sighed, unbuckling her seatbelt. "I know it's not much, but it's our new home, and with a little work, it'll be perfect." She turned to face the children, her expression serious. "I know this has been a lot of change for you both, but I promise we're going to be okay. We're going to make this place our own." Lily nodded enthusiastically, her energy seemingly unaffected by the gloomy appearance of the house. "Can we go explore it now, Mommy? Please?" Sarah chuckled and ruffled Lily's hair. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's go take a look around." As the family stepped out of the car, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of unease settle in the pit of her stomach. The house seemed to loom over them, its windows like watchful eyes. Shaking off the feeling, she led the children up the creaking porch steps and unlocked the front door. The interior was just as worn as the exterior, with peeling wallpaper and a thick layer of dust covering every surface. Lily immediately darted off, her excited giggles echoing through the halls. Ethan, on the other hand, remained at Sarah's side, his eyes scanning the room with a wary expression. "It's a bit rough around the edges, but we can make it work," Sarah said, trying to sound reassuring. She placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I know it's not what you're used to, but I promise we're going to turn this place into a real home." Ethan nodded, but the uncertainty in his eyes remained. Sarah couldn't blame him. After everything they'd been through, it was understandable that he would be hesitant to embrace this new chapter. "Mommy, look what I found!" Lily's voice called out from the other room, and Sarah and Ethan hurried to join her. In the dusty living room, Lily stood beside an old, ornate cabinet, a curious expression on her face. "There's a box inside. Can I open it?" Sarah approached the cabinet, peering inside. Nestled among the shelves was a worn cardboard box, its edges frayed and yellowed with age. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to take a look," she said, reaching for the latch. As she lifted the lid, a cloud of dust swirled up, causing Lily to sneeze. Inside the box were an assortment of trinkets and old photographs, remnants of the previous owners' lives. Sarah sifted through the items, her fingers tracing the worn edges of the photographs. Ethan leaned in, his eyes drawn to a particular item. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to a porcelain doll that rested atop the other objects. Sarah carefully lifted the doll, its delicate features and intricate dress catching the light. "It's a vintage doll," she murmured, studying it closely. "Looks like it's been through quite a bit." Lily's eyes widened, and she reached out to touch the doll's dress. "Can we keep it, Mommy? Please?" Sarah hesitated, a strange feeling of unease settling over her. There was something about the doll's vacant eyes and eerily perfect features that made her uneasy. But Lily's hopeful expression tugged at her heartstrings, and she found herself nodding. "All right, if you'd like to keep it, we can." Ethan frowned, his gaze fixed on the doll. "Are you sure that's a good idea, Mom?" Sarah offered him a reassuring smile. "It's just an old doll, Ethan. What harm could it do?" Little did she know, the doll's arrival would mark the beginning of a terrifying ordeal that would test the very limits of her strength as a mother. The first few days in the new house passed uneventfully, though an air of unease lingered. The house creaked and groaned as if it were alive, its sounds amplified in the stillness of the night. Sarah chalked it up to old wood and shifting foundations, but Ethan was less convinced. On the third night, Sarah woke with a start to the sound of faint whispers. She lay frozen in bed, straining to hear, but the murmurs stopped as abruptly as they had started. Telling herself it was just the wind, she turned over and fell back into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, as Sarah poured cereal for the children, Lily hesitated at the table, her usual cheer dampened. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling, "the doll talked to me last night." Sarah froze mid-pour, glancing at Ethan, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "What do you mean, sweetie?" Sarah asked, trying to sound casual. "It whispered. It said it wanted to play." Sarah forced a smile, brushing a stray strand of hair from Lily's face. "It was just a dream, honey. Dolls don't talk." But that night, Sarah's conviction wavered. The nightmares began soon after. Ethan was the first to wake screaming, drenched in sweat. He refused to explain what he'd seen, but his eyes darted toward the doll, sitting innocently on Lily's shelf. By the end of the week, Lily was drawing more than ever, covering pages with crude crayon sketches. One evening, as Sarah cleaned the living room, she noticed a new drawing lying on the coffee table. Her heart sank. It was the doll, but its expression was different. Its usual placid smile had twisted into something cruel, with jagged teeth and hollow, menacing eyes. "Lily," Sarah called, trying to keep her voice steady, "did you draw this?" Lily peeked into the room, hesitating before nodding. "It was in my dream, Mommy." The doll looked like that. Ethan, who had been watching silently, finally spoke. "We need to get rid of it, Mom. That thing isn't right." Sarah wanted to agree, but a part of her hesitated. It was just a doll, wasn't it? Strange symbols began to appear around the house. They were crude, drawn in bright crayon on walls, furniture, even the windows. At first, Sarah assumed Lily was to blame, but when confronted, her daughter denied it vehemently. "It wasn't me," Lily said, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't even know what they mean." Ethan, who had been sulking by the doorway, muttered, "It's the doll." Sarah sighed, exhaustion creeping into her voice. "Enough with the doll, Ethan. It's not alive. It's just a toy. Then why don't you throw it away?" Ethan challenged, his tone sharp. Sarah had no answer. That afternoon, Mrs. Jenkins, the neighbor from across the street, paid a visit. She was an elderly woman with a kind face but sharp eyes, and she carried a plate of cookies wrapped in plastic. "I thought I'd stop by and welcome you to the neighborhood," Mrs. Jenkins said, stepping inside. Her gaze lingered on the peeling wallpaper and dusty corners. "This house has been empty for quite a while," Sarah offered a strained smile. "We're hoping to fix it up a bit. It's a little rough, but we'll manage." Mrs. Jenkins lowered her voice. "You know about the disappearances, don't you?" Sarah blinked. "Disappearances?" Mrs. Jenkins leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Families that lived here before you, all gone. Some say they just moved away, but others..." She hesitated. "Others think the house had something to do with it. People hear things, see things." Sarah forced a laugh. "I'm sure it's just old rumors. You know how small towns can be." Mrs. Jenkins didn't laugh. Her eyes wandered to the shelf where the doll now sat. "Be careful, dear," she said softly. That night, the crash woke them all. Sarah bolted upright in bed, her heart pounding. From somewhere downstairs came the sound of shattering glass. "Lily!" she cried, leaping out of bed. But Lily was already at her door, clutching a stuffed animal, her eyes wide with fear. Ethan appeared moments later, holding a baseball bat he'd found in the garage. "Stay here," Sarah ordered, grabbing her phone for light. She crept down the stairs, each step creaking beneath her weight. The living room was a mess. The cabinet that had held the doll was toppled, its contents scattered across the floor. The doll lay face down in the rubble. As Sarah bent to pick it up, a faint sound reached her ears. Laughter, low, guttural, and echoing from somewhere deep within the house. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier with each passing day. Shadows seemed darker, the creaks in the floorboards more sinister. Sarah could barely sleep, her dreams haunted by faint whispers and fleeting images of the doll's chilling smile. She began to regret ever allowing it to stay. Ethan, more determined than ever to prove the doll was the source of their torment, took matters into his own hands. One afternoon, while Sarah was on a call and Lily napped upstairs, he snuck into Lily's room. The doll sat perched on her shelf, its unblinking eyes fixed on the doorway. Armed with a screwdriver and a flashlight, Ethan placed the doll on the floor and began to inspect it. "This thing isn't normal," he muttered under his breath, running his fingers over its porcelain surface. As he tilted it, he heard a faint rattle from inside. His heart raced. "What's in you?" After some struggle, he found a seam along the doll's back. It wasn't an obvious compartment, but it clicked open with a sharp snap. Inside was a small bundle of yellowed photographs tied with a brittle piece of string. Ethan's hands trembled as he untied the knot and spread the photographs on the floor. The images were faded but clear enough to see families, parents and children, posing in front of the same Victorian house. Ethan's stomach turned as he flipped through them, his unease growing with each one. In the final photograph, his blood ran cold. It was a picture of the doll, sitting on the same shelf in Lily's room. That evening, Ethan showed the photographs to Sarah. She examined them with growing horror, her hands shaking. "Where did you find these?" she demanded. "In the doll," Ethan admitted. "It's like it's watching us." Sarah's chest tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. "We'll figure this out. I'll get rid of it first thing tomorrow." But the doll seemed to have other plans. That night, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. They weren't just confined to Sarah's room this time. They echoed through the halls, pulling at the children's dreams. Lily woke up screaming, her cries piercing the silence. When Sarah rushed into her room, she found her daughter sitting upright, tears streaming down her face. "It was calling me, Mommy," Lily sobbed, pointing to the doll on the floor. "It said it wanted to play." Sarah scooped Lily into her arms, her heart pounding. "It's just a bad dream, sweetheart." But her voice wavered, and Ethan, standing in the doorway, didn't look convinced. The next morning, Sarah called the local police. Detective James, a gruff but well-meaning man in his late 40s, arrived at the house with a notepad in hand. "I understand you've been experiencing unusual events?" he asked, raising an eyebrow as Sarah recounted the incidents. "It's the doll," Ethan interjected. "It's doing all of this." Detective James chuckled. "A haunted doll? You've been watching too many horror movies, kid." "It's not a joke," Ethan snapped, his face red with frustration. "Look at these." He thrust the photographs toward James, who examined them with mild interest. "These are old," James said, handing them back. "Probably just left behind by the previous owners. Look, I'll file a report, but I doubt it's anything supernatural. Most of the time, these things have a logical explanation." Sarah forced a polite smile, but her faith in the detective was already waning. That night, Sarah decided to confront the doll herself. She placed it on the dining room table, staring into its vacant eyes. "I don't know what you are or what you want," she said, her voice firm but shaky. "But you're not welcome here. Leave my family alone." The doll, of course, didn't respond, but the lights flickered, and a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, rattling the windows. Sarah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as the doll tipped over onto its side. The breaking point came just before dawn. A loud crash jolted the family awake. Rushing downstairs, they found the doll in the living room, sitting upright on the shattered remnants of the coffee table. "I put it in the trash outside," Sarah whispered, backing away. Ethan grabbed the bat again, raising it over the doll. "We need to destroy it." But before he could swing, the doll's head turned. A slow, deliberate movement that froze everyone in their tracks. Sarah screamed, grabbing her children and dragging them upstairs. She locked the door to her bedroom, her hands trembling as she dialed Detective James. "You need to come now," she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not safe here." When James arrived an hour later, the doll was gone. "Where did it go?" Sarah asked frantically, searching the house. But no one had an answer. James shook his head, muttering something about pranks and overactive imaginations. But the fear in Sarah's eyes lingered long after he left. That night, none of them slept. The house seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with a foreboding silence. And though the doll was nowhere to be found, its presence lingered, a shadow that refused to fade. The morning after the doll disappeared, Sarah knew she couldn't wait for answers to come to her. She spent hours online, poring over articles, forums, and historical records about the house and any mention of cursed dolls. Her search eventually led her to an obscure occult text about vessels, used to bind spirits, and her blood ran cold as she read the description. A doll, crafted as a conduit, created through a ritual to trap the essence of something dark, a remnant of a restless soul or something far worse. The text warned of the signs: whispers, symbols, moving objects, and escalating danger to anyone who challenged its presence. Sarah's breath hitched as she scrolled further. The only way to sever the connection, the text claimed, was to confront the vessel directly in a binding ritual and destroy the link to its power. That night, Sarah gathered Ethan and Lily in the living room. They were all on edge, every creak of the house making them jump. Sarah knelt before them, clutching the printouts of her research. "We can't run from this," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "Whatever this thing is, it's tied to the house and it's tied to us now. But I believe we can stop it." Together, Ethan nodded, his jaw set with determination. "What do we have to do?" Sarah laid out a plan. They would find the doll and perform the ritual outlined in the text. It required a circle of salt for protection, the reading of an incantation, and the destruction of the vessel in a cleansing fire. "Will it be gone for good?" Lily asked, clutching her stuffed animal. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, her voice soft, "but we have to try." The doll revealed itself that very night. As they prepared the living room, the temperature in the house dropped suddenly, their breath visible in the dim light. Then, from upstairs, they heard a faint giggle. "It's in Lily's room," Ethan whispered, gripping the bat he refused to let go of. Sarah steeled herself, leading the way. In Lily's room, the doll sat on the bed, its head tilted slightly, its eyes seeming to glint in the moonlight. "Everyone stay close," Sarah instructed. She stepped forward, sprinkling salt in a circle around the doll. Ethan and Lily stood just outside the boundary, their faces pale but resolute. The ritual began. Sarah read from the printout, her voice firm despite the growing sense of dread. The air grew heavy, pressing down on her chest as she chanted. The doll remained motionless at first, but as the incantation continued, the room seemed to come alive. The walls groaned, the lights flickered, and a deafening wind swirled within the salt circle. Lily screamed as the doll's head turned sharply toward Sarah, its painted lips parting in a grotesque smile. "You can't stop me," a guttural voice hissed, though no one was speaking. "Yes, I can," Sarah said, her voice trembling but strong. She repeated the final lines of the incantation, holding the doll's lifeless gaze. The doll began to thrash, its tiny limbs moving as though possessed. It lunged at the edge of the salt circle, but an invisible barrier held it back. Ethan darted forward, pouring lighter fluid onto the doll. "Do it, Mom," he shouted. Sarah struck a match, her hands shaking. The flame flickered for a moment before she dropped it onto the doll. The fire erupted instantly, a piercing scream filling the air. The doll writhed, its porcelain face cracking as the flames consumed it. Black smoke rose, swirling and dissipating as if the darkness itself was being pulled away. And then silence. The aftermath was eerily calm. The doll was reduced to ash, and the oppressive weight that had haunted the house seemed to lift. The family stood in the living room, staring at the charred remains in the center of the salt circle. "Is it over?" Lily whispered. Sarah wrapped her arms around both children, pulling them close. "I think so," she said, though a part of her wasn't entirely sure. In the days that followed, the family began to reclaim their home. Sarah painted over the symbols on the walls, Ethan helped repair the furniture, and Lily started drawing pictures of happy memories instead of nightmares. But the scars remained. Sarah often found herself staring at the spot where the doll had burned, wondering if she had truly broken the curse. Ethan slept with the bat by his bed, and Lily refused to go into her room alone. One evening, as Sarah prepared dinner, she caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye. She spun around, her heart racing, but saw nothing. Shaking her head, she muttered, "Just my imagination." But somewhere, deep in the shadows of the house, a faint giggle echoed, just loud enough to remind her that the darkness might not be gone entirely. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked our video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like our video, and share your thoughts with us in the comments.